Now it says going live.
Okay, that's great. All set. Welcome to Jackie McMillan's webinar, Autism Essentials. My name is Susan Watts from the Autism Intervention Clinic in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And Jackie and I are really so thrilled that many of you have joined us this evening. We have people actually from New Zealand, from all over the world. So I want to tell you that Jackie and I started working together almost 4 years ago. And when we started, we were giving physical seminars to parents, educators, and health community support workers, health professionals, and adults on the spectrum. And then last year, we had an idea to go technologically advanced Google on Air. So this is live. We've had our ups and downs and frustrations with this, but we hope that we've worked out all the kinks. And some of you I know have heard Jackie speak before, and I'm sure you've always enjoyed her, and you know that she packs a lot into this 1 hour. For those of you who have never heard her before, you're in for a real treat. Jackie is always passionate about her subject, and she gives you a lot of information, and she's really here to support anyone who's dealing with autism. So Jackie, are you all set?
I'm all set. Thanks very much, Susan. For those of you who don't know, I have autism, and it's always a bit of an adventure when you have autism because some things you can do very, very well, off the charts better than most people in the rest of the population can, but then there are the deficits that go with. And Susan has been just absolutely wonderful to collaborate with because she's able to handle a lot of the things that are more challenging for me and allows me to get my research and my work and my compilations out much, much better. So I'm not going to talk too long here without diving into the material. I'm just going to pull up the slides and get us ready to go so that we can get through the webinar materials. And Susan, has that got it up? Okay.
Up there, fine.
Okay, good, perfect. It's really helpful having someone you can double check with. All right, so we're going to talk about the things that you absolutely need to know. Number one is who is getting better? Who has autism? Who is seeing an increase in function and in capacity to get things done and in health? Well, there's a study that was done from 92 to 2001 in California. They tracked 7,000 children, and about 10% of the ones who started out in the low functioning group moved into the highest functioning group by age 14. Now, what were the keys? What were the things that set these kids aside that made that headway? Well, the mothers of the kids who bloomed tended to be more educated and tended to not be minorities. And what that means to me is that there are financial and informational barriers to people getting the support that they need and that educated, affluent parents are able to access. And I want to close that gap. I want everyone to be able to thrive with autism. So there's lots of other studies that have been done, but this British study gives you a sense of the kind of information that's coming forward. This one's only a small study, 37 children between 5 and 8 years old, and over 3 years that they were tracked. Every single one of them experienced a decline in autistic symptoms. Now, 19% of them improved enough that they didn't fit the diagnostic criteria for autism anymore. And yet, what they're looking at is these kids still have autism. The behavioral features of autism weren't reversed. They waxed and they waned the way the moon does. And it's like that with me. I'll always be autistic, but there are some real advantages to this way of being. I wouldn't give it up. So what were these early interventions that these two studies were talking about? Well, the second one was basically talking about intensified social environment, some aspects of a detoxified physical environment, and some aspects of effective holistic health support, but not as thorough as it could be. And I will get you in there as to why it wasn't. So some autism interventions are actually damaging. Iatrogenic is what we call treatments by medical professionals or by therapeutic professionals that do no more harm than good. So, for example, drugs will often take us further off balance because our chemistry is already off, and something that's designed for a body that's got a usual metabolism can make us crash. So go very, very carefully with drugs for us. Now, there's also a lot of treatments out there that have to do with rote training, as though you're trying to teach a pet. And these techniques, when you're dealing with autistics, throughout the well, I'll get there in terms of IQ, but essentially you're asking someone with a very high IQ to pretend that they're stupid. And what that means is most kids find them very boring, and at worst, it can do what it did to Jacob Barnett, who's an astrophysicist who has autism. I think he's 14 now, but he's brilliant. But in doing all those repetitive rote therapies, he was just going further and further out into space, and so this is another thing that you want to be very cautious around. And the third thing I really recommend caution around: electroshock and electroconvulsive therapies can significantly reduce already fragile functioning. So whenever you can, avoid these things. And yes, they are still being used for people who are assumed to be mentally incompetent or mentally disabled in some way. All right, so how expensive is autism? Well, there's a study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the pediatric journal, just last year, from a study from the University of Philadelphia and Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Sorry, stumbling over my words. Let's try again. Essentially, if you're looking at taking care of someone with autism who has an intellectual disability, this can cost up to $2.4 million in the States and up to $2.2 million in the United Kingdom over the course of that person's lifetime. Now that's a lot. Now if you're looking at autistic individuals who don't have any intellectual disability, the lifetime cost is estimated at 1.4 something million and 1.3 something million in the UK. Now, the largest contributors to these total costs across all age groups when they did this figuring out were direct non-medical costs, such as special education, and indirect costs, such as productivity losses, lost wages for the parents who were spending an awful lot of time taking care of their kids. All right, does autism have to be so costly? It does not. This research assumed that, number one, autistics will recover minimal health and function, if any, and will never make a financial or service contribution to society. Now, when we get the right support, we do make contributions. The second assumption is that therapies are going to be very expensive and aren't going to be very effective. There are a lot of things that you can do that aren't going to cost you anything more than what you're already spending and that are highly effective. And I'm going to talk about those this evening. And the third thing is that the assumption is that parents won't have access to the best information the way past parents haven't, so that these parents will lose many more years of income than necessary to help their kids really thrive. None of those have to be true. So if these studies' assumptions are wrong, then what's actually true? Parents with the right knowledge and skill and with the right support right now, see significant gains in their autistic child's function and health, and many autistics find work and fulfillment with or without their parents' support. Now, second thing to pay attention to is that the most effective therapies can be done in a home or a classroom as part of normal home and school activities. And this is what my programs are about. And the third thing is the best information, the most key information that you need is here today, and it's free. Your know-how matters a lot more than how much money you have. There are spectrum adults out there right now who have figured out how to optimize their autism and who are still making gains, often on a shoestring budget, and often with very little time. They're working around the other things in their life, which usually are much harder for us than for other people. Now, these spectrum adults are supporting each other across cultures, across continents, and they're achieving better health and function as adults. So I really want to highlight that for you. Health can improve at any age. It's not the brain. We're not looking at key developmental stages that will be missed. Our brains have developed quite differently because they have developed under such high stress. They're very different brains, but there are advantages to these brains, and we'll get to that. So let's talk about a few autistics who have to some degree optimized. Well, Temple Grandin is one. She optimized her environment, and her parent, her mom in particular, did a lot in terms of parental love and attention, speech and language training, lots of time to play. Nature connection is huge for us. I'll get there and why that's important. Calm environment, deep touch therapy, and practical skills training regarding her interests. Well, what helped Satoshi Tajiri? For those of you who don't know, this guy is the fellow who invented Pokemon, and he's quite a recluse, but he has optimized his autism as well, and he had a lot of support from his parents. He eats really healthy foods. He had a lot of support from his parents regarding his special interests. He had a nature connection. The guy was fascinated with insects as a kid. He grew up in a calm environment, a rural area, and I think he does a lot to keep his environments calm still. And he had lots of time to play, and of course he's still playing because he's creating games. And what helped Donna Williams? Donna Williams is from Australia, and when I first learned about my autism, it was so reassuring to me to read about Donna. I was an adult, and when I found out, and Donna had written a book at that point, just one, called Nobody Nowhere. And it was so reassuring to me to realize that I wasn't alone. It wasn't all my fault, the things that I was dealing with. And she had done a lot of her healing as an adult as well. And that was very encouraging to me because I was embarking on my journey as an adult. So what did she look at? She looked at nutritional supplementation. She was able to follow her special interests as an adult. She does a lot in terms of sensory calming. She, like me, did a huge amount of trial and error and is still doing it. Lots of playtime in terms of music and other arts. She was able to access some compassionate psychological support. And she also got some great gut, immune, and metabolic support. And that's quite unusual for those of us in the spectrum. We tend to have a very difficult time getting the health support that we need, at least from the services that are available to us easily. All right, so John Elder Robeson, he's the last few years he's written a number of books, and he's quite a big name in the music industry. He has optimized his environment, had lots of parental love and attention, lots of time to play as a kid and an adult. He was encouraged to follow his special interests, very much into music and craftsmanship, and music is great for brain development. lots of practical skills training in energy medicine. He's also done a lot of exploration of energy medicine, as have I. And it's very relevant to those of us in the autistic spectrum. It's not as far out. If you haven't bumped into it, there are a number of textbooks that have gathered global research on things like ultrasound and different electromagnetic frequencies that have different impacts on health. So the whole question earlier about this assumption in that study that autistics are not going to contribute financially and socially. Well, over on the right we have Albert Einstein and we have Leonardo da Vinci. There are lots of other historical examples of people who today would probably be diagnosed as Asperger's at least, who lived very productive lives. And you'll find that most of us who make it out of the fog do. So who am I to be talking about all of this with you? I had a pretty big jump in function from my time before I was 11 to the time from 11 till now. So before I was 11, I had horrible digestion. I chewed all the time, bad allergies, trouble sleeping, lots of meltdown. I was hyperactive, and yet at the same time, I had slowed reaction time. My mom would throw me baseballs and try to help me learn how to catch and bat, and I could not react in time with things coming at me quickly. And often it would take me days to respond to things that were said. I had poor pronunciation, and I hope you can understand me today. I used tuning to communicate, and what that means is I used commercial jingles and songs that had lyrics that were close in mood or in meaning to what I wanted to say. I was dyslexic. I had lots of nightmares, poor balance, poor coordination. I was about 5 years behind emotionally, and that is not fun in school. Many of us have very bad school experiences, particularly early on. But I was also musical, and I grew up in a very intellectual family, and that was encouraged. So what changed for me? Well, worked a lot on communication and emotional skill. I'm now fully verbal with, I hope, good pronunciation. Digestion's getting better. It's still improving, and I see improvements in my cognitive function and in my emotional stability with every improvement in digestion. It's major. I was able to heal balance and coordination in my 30s. I could finally do a yoga headstand, yes. And I mostly eliminated my allergies. I still have a few little reactions, but my immune system is getting healthier and healthier. I usually sleep long and well. I have good reaction times. I can actually catch a ball now. And while I'm still dyslexic, what I've discovered is the gift side of that. So I can tell which is right way and which is not the usual way around, but I can also do many things both-sided in my life. And I have lots of friends. So just to give you a sense, I mean, there are people with autism who are thriving now. Well, how are we thriving? How did it change? How did I know that I could do this? Well, when I was 11, I spent 1 month at a summer camp, and my quality of life went up and up and up and up and up. And then I came home, and within the 2 days past when I left that camp, my symptoms, my mental, my emotional, my physical symptoms all just crunched in on me again. And what I realized was that environments could harm me or they could help me. And so I started creating environments that helped me. And you can do that too. Now what that meant was a lot of ongoing trial and error. You know, things like, I had done a lot of swimming at that summer camp. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna get involved in swimming. And the only places to swim where I lived were chlorine pools. And while my body enjoyed the exercise, my immune system and my respiratory system and my digestive system all were much, much more challenged from doing that swimming. And so I started to tease out, okay, what's helping, what's hurting, how is it helping and hurting? And that took me into reading medical journals in high school, which took me into doing 2 years in pre-medical studies at university and realizing that the things that I had discovered up to that point in time that were helping were things that were not talked about in medical school, even though they were in the medical journals. So I kind of thought, oh my goodness, now what? Well, I went and got a degree in environmental studies, and I started networking with other adults in the autistic spectrum. And wow, was that a relief? Because I realized that it's not just me, it's not my fault, and I wasn't crazy, that the environmental thing was helping me, that I could tinker with my internal and external environments and get better and better and better function. So I've had a career in environmental health, and I've sampled many, many therapies, and I've researched many more. And what I do is I put this information in something that's really understandable, so that you know from the symptoms you're seeing and you're experiencing, you know where you need to go. So what else that's out there about autism might not be true? Well, are there more males than females, or are girls being mixed? Is it a neurological disorder or an adaptive response to stress? Do we really not know what causes autism? Well, we actually have over 60 years of evidence on 5 specific root causes of autism. So let's dig into that first one. Are there more guys than girls? No. At the highest level of impairment, the numbers are equal. Now, we also know that male and female brains are different, and that these differences impact behavior. Now, I'm not going to cover all of these points in the slides. I'm just going to pick out a few highlights. But if you want to go deeper, let me know, and I'll take you deeper into the data in terms of it being very likely that there are as many women with autism as there are men. But here, when we look at the highest impairment levels, a 2000 study of 8-year-olds with autism in North Carolina found that those who are most severely impaired were equally represented in terms of boys and girls. So where are the less impaired girls? Well, I think this is one of the biggest ways to explain it. I mean, there are lots of ways that we can influence environment to make our brain and our behavior be more quote-unquote male or more quote-unquote female. And certainly different cultures have had very different ideas of what was a male thing to be or a female thing to be over time. But overall, when you look at how male brains are structured, male brains are set up for using only one side of the brain at once really effectively. And so when they're trying to do things that use both sides of the brain, it's harder for them. Female brains, on the other hand, are optimized for doing things that use both sides of the brain, and social interactions use both sides of the brain. What this means is that women socialize easier. So even though we don't necessarily blend in very well, we are often harder to spot. We camouflage better. Now, many of us also have much more challenge accessing diagnosis. We're less likely to be diagnosed unless we have intellectual or behavioral problems. Now, Summer Bishop, who's at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, says girls present with more subtle difficulties, and so they're easier to miss. Maricela Huerta at University of Michigan says parents of girls often note that the ASD test questions don't capture what is unusual or abnormal about their daughter's play habits. And I'm using those unusual or abnormal in quotations here because there are very normal ways of play for those of us in the autistic spectrum, and we do play. Now, all of this stuff just completely ignores the stigma of mental illness and how difficult it is to acquire a diagnosis for many of us who are women. All right, what about the next one? Is it a neurological disorder? Well, okay, when you look at the data, and again, I can only cover a few of these, autism IQ is average or higher on some key types of intelligence. Now, when you look at our brains, we have very, very high inflammation in the brains, and there are chemistry differences in our brains. We've got altered cerebral blood flow, we've got altered brain responses, and there are some size and morphology differences from autism brains to the brains in the rest of the population. And there's one more thing that's kind of cool. I won't go into it today, but again, if you want more information on neurology of autism, get in touch. But there's a birth chemistry lag that may be part of what's going on as well. So let's dig into the IQ. Well, we talk about low functioning and high functioning autistics. I don't talk about low functioning and high functioning because to me, what we have are autistics who have very, very difficult health problems, and we have autistics who have less difficult health problems and are not as weighed down in their interactions because of them. Now, what's happening with autistics who don't communicate very well are that IQ tests aren't capturing their actual intellectual abilities. Because they have trouble with communication delays, with social challenges, with behavior, IQ test is not a way to get through those challenges. And so children with autism have some skills that are at or above the average level of intelligence, regardless of how quote-unquote low functioning we think they are. So, or actually our society thinks they are. Now, most autism spectrum tests and diagnoses focus on what we can't do, but we're really talented at things that use pattern recognition, logical reasoning, and picking out irregularities. Isabelle Soulière, who's a Harvard researcher, says many of those who are considered low functioning can solve really complex problems if you give them material that they can optimally process. There are things that we can do really, really well, even at the highest level of impairment. Now, is it really neurological if the problem starts somewhere else? If the IQ or the intelligence or certain types of intelligence are holding despite the difficulties, and every one of those problems is caused by something else, the inflammation, the delayed responses, all of these things, if they're caused by other things, is it really a neurological problem, or is it a problem caused by something else? I would argue there's nothing wrong with our neurology except that it's reacting to 5 health problems in the body. Well, what are these unknown causes of autism? Okay, you've got to look at this. Okay, 437 publications. This is from a MAPS summary of studies on autism. 437 publications examined immune dysregulation or inflammation in autism. 95% found an association, which means 95% of people in the autistic spectrum have immune challenges or inflammation. 100% of the 115 publications looking at oxidative stress found oxidative stress in autistics. All autistics have oxidative stress. What this means is that we aren't getting enough antioxidants when we're burning through antioxidants way faster than other people, which is part of what inflammation does, but there are other things at play as well. Okay, 153 publications looked at mitochondrial dysfunction. Well, what does that mean? It means that our bodies aren't as good at producing energy to get things done as other bodies. And our brain, which tends to try to get things done really quickly, tends to show this faster than any other part of our body. 95% of those 153 studies showed impaired energy production or mitochondrial dysfunction in autistics. All right, 190 publications examined environmental toxin exposures in autistics. 89% found that autistics have a higher toxic body burden than the rest of the population. And the Autistic Research Institute in the States has actually found that there are no autistics tested to date who do not have impaired detoxification. And what that means is we accumulate toxins much faster than most people do. Now, of all of these studies that were done, and this is not comprehensive by any means, this is just from a couple of years ago, there were more genetic studies than anything else, any other type of if you add together all of the other studies on autism, genetic studies outnumbered them by far. So 1,576 studies on genetics. But there's something you need to know about genetics. Every time you hear somebody say, we think it's a genetic disorder, genes are affected by only two things. One of them is our beliefs and our attitudes. Another is our environment. How traumatic, how stressful, how toxic, how nutritional deficiencies, toxicants, immune challenges, pharmaceuticals, environmental factors change how our genes express themselves. And we can actually change how our genes express themselves in our lifetime by changing the stressors that we are exposing them to. So Nardone and colleagues did a study in 2014. Essentially, they're looking at alternate immune response correlates with epigenetic modulation. Epigenetics is when your environment is affecting your genes relevant to immune functions. So our internal environment is affecting our genes. 2014 Basil and colleagues study. Early life exposure to inflammation may be associated with epigenetic changes. That means environmentally caused gene changes in certain brain areas. Okay, oxidative stress. Let's just pick that out as the one that 100% of autistics and 100% of the studies showed a link between oxidative stress and autism. Well, why is oxidative stress happening in the body? Well, here's some of the bigger reasons. Digestive challenges burn through antioxidants a lot faster. If you're more vulnerable to particular health assaults like infections or toxins, you burn through antioxidants faster. And just so you know, antioxidants are things like vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, zinc, chromium, selenium. These are things that help your body not rust. The way iron in a car would rust, your body needs protection from oxygen, and these are the things that help your body protect itself. If we have a higher toxic body burden, we use up a lot more antioxidants. If we have immune challenges, we do as well. If we're malnourished, we're not getting enough of the right nutrients, we're going to have oxidative stress because we're not absorbing the antioxidants that we might be taking in. And then if you have disrupted nerve and hormone communication, you might not actually be getting the nutrients to the places where they're needed. Okay, so there's something that didn't happen in that MAP study, and that was a look at the gut and digestion problems in autism. And these are pervasive. All right, 43% of autistics have a leaky gut. And what that means is that when you eat something, undigested food particles get into your bloodstream. And what happens is your immune system then starts to react to this, which is how we end up getting allergies and food sensitivities. Now, there's something called lymphoid nodular hyperplasia in 93% of children who regress. But it only shows up in 14% of unaffected children. Now, this is something that's highly associated with delayed reaction food sensitivity. So it tends to be tied in with the whole leaky gut picture. Chronic colitis, that means the colon. And if you look at that image of the gut that I've put there, you can see the part that's got kind of doing a big M around and then dragging down out at the bottom. That is your colon. And Colitis is inflammation in the colon, and that is found in 88% of children who regress. And the colon is a major place for absorption of toxins in those of us who don't have the right creatures in our gut. We're supposed to have this rainforest ecosystem, and if it's not there, if we've got a desert instead, we can have some nasty creatures in there that are making some fairly toxic products that we reabsorb. 69% of autistics have acid reflux esophagitis. What does that mean? Well, heartburn, but essentially what it means is that your valve isn't working right, and you're getting vomit coming back into your esophagus, which really can be quite painful. 41% of autistics have chronic gastritis. This means that the stomach lining is inflamed. And if you look up in the upper right-hand corner, the thing that looks like a backward C or maybe a moon, that's the stomach. And then 66% have chronic duodenitis. And this is inflammation at the top of the small intestine. Now, the squiggly stuff that's in the middle at the bottom there, that's the small intestine. But if you look at the bottom of the stomach, there's a kind of not as squiggly section before it heads into behind the colon. That's the duodenum, and that would be what would be inflamed. Now, what's really interesting is that autistics and their caregivers often report improvement on special diets. Not only improvements for their gastrointestinal symptoms, but also in behavioral and cognitive problems. And this is even for autistics who don't have obvious gastrointestinal problems. And so what kind of things show improvement? Well, hyperactivity, communication skills, attentiveness. Now, it's also interesting, but if you have someone who's dealing with seizures, fasting can reduce or eliminate seizures. And also, what's interesting is changes in your diet can change the compounds that leave your body through your urine, as well as changing your behavior. So you can definitely see you're making a difference. Now, when you change what you eat, that tends to change your gut biology as well. Changes happen sometimes as soon as one meal, but often in as short a time as a week, you can see a major change in the types of biology that are living in the gut. And we're supposed to have this really complex, beautiful ecosystem in there. So a little bit more about digestion. Nonverbal children are more likely to have obvious GI troubles than those who can speak. Well, that's a pretty good indicator to me that GI problems are probably part of why they're nonverbal. Now, 80% of nonverbal autistic children treated with antibiotics see improvements in function and learning, at least while they're on those antibiotics. Now, the problem is when you come off those antibiotics, because antibiotics tend to kill off a lot of the gut bacteria that are good for us, that are probiotics that we need. And that leaves the bad guys. All right, so a 2014 study found that anxiety, sensory overresponsivity, and gastrointestinal problems are possibly interrelated. They found a strong correlation. Now, because about 85% of our immune function happens in the gut, when you change this internal environment, you see major improvements. Now, if you can get that gut improved, you see major improvements in quality of life, in health, and in overall function of the person who's seen those gut improvements. All right, well, what helps digestion? You can change that internal environment through optimal healthy foods, through avoiding drugs and pollution, through restoring the gut ecosystem. Now, we know this because there are thousands of case studies about autistics getting healthier on improved diets. Now, the thing is that doing a large research study on diet would require large funds, and most research is funded by drug companies, not farmers. However, if you look at the China study and you look at some of the really good diet and health research out there, the diet that most helps autistics is right along the same lines as those studies. Okay, so what about toxins? I want to just draw your attention to the word intoxication. Autistics show much higher body burden of many different types of toxins, pesticides and other agricultural chemicals, industrial chemicals, heavy metals, air pollution, and all of these harm the body directly. And when you can't move them out of your body easily, they harm you more. Now, the biggest problem with that is that as the brain is doing its main development, it's exquisitely sensitive to chemicals, and some chemicals can have a huge impact. Heavy metals bind to fatty tissues, and heavy metals in the brain are associated with quite a number of things. Chlorine, yeah, I can't cover it all right now. Oh, it's frustrating. I want to give it all to you. So what gets rid of this body burden? Well, you've got to change the external environment, so you're taking less toxins in. You've got to change the body's internal environment so that the detox mechanisms can work better and can start to catch up on the backlog. And then you can look at supporting detoxification safely. Now, the image that's over on the right here, why have I got this here? Well, if you're pouring water into a cup at the same time as you're trying to empty that cup, you're not going to be able to empty the cup because there's water coming in. If you stop the toxins coming into your body, your ability to get the existing toxins out of your body is way easier. I really want to ram that home. Okay, autistics are seeing under and over immunity, and this kind of goes back to that MAP study. Sometimes you'll see both under and over immunity in the same person. Now, if you're seeing early and frequent ear infections, that's often a warning sign that an immune system is really struggling, and to be very careful and do lots of immune support things. Now, there are some very interesting overlaps, huge overlaps between the symptoms of Lyme disease and autism, and the XRMV virus is new data that's coming out, and I'm looking forward to learning more about it, but it looks like it might be key in a number of very debilitating conditions. Now, when you're looking at autistics, hyperimmunity and autoimmunity, that means being immune to some of the cells in your own body, so you're fighting your own body. These are the rule in autism. They're not the exception. You see this in almost everyone in the autistic spectrum. Now, if you want to support the immune system, you have to support the gut. About 85% of immune function happens in the gut, starts in the gut, is originated from the gut. Okay, now most medical doctors and naturopathic doctors stop with the gut, the immune, and the toxin issues. But when you look at what adults with autism and a few brave researchers are looking at, there are two more underlying health problems. So why am I calling these researchers brave? Well, medical schools are funded by drug companies here in North America. Medical journals are run or funded by drug companies. Health research is overwhelmingly funded by drug companies. Medical conferences are funded by drug companies. What this means is that if a medical doctor looks any farther than drugs for answers, they can lose funding for their labs, for their research, they can not be able to publish in the journals, they can lose their jobs. So you've got to be brave, or you have to be in a pretty protected position to be able to go further. So what is the biomedical model missing? Well, brain and nervous system can get compressed by a variety, or distorted by a variety of different things during life. And many autistics experience really profound increases of quality of life and function when the nervous system can communicate with itself freely without any of this compression and distortion. Now, this tends to be through, that'll be the next slide. I won't jump ahead. Now, the second thing is they're missing the impact of stress and trauma. Now, trauma's impacts on our mental and physical health are a lot more pervasive than we currently acknowledge. Dr. Robert Scare, isn't that a great name for somebody who studies trauma? Scare. Um, he's a neurologist of over 40 over 4 decades. He's been doing rehab in neurology. So, brain and nervous system. We know that a variety of different types of treatments are making life significantly better for some autistics. So the nervous system is a likely place to look for issues. And it's not that hard to do these assessments. And it's, it can often take a little while to correct them, but this is a really worthwhile place to look. I have seen major gains in function from chiropractic, osteopathic, and craniosacral support. And I also am quite familiar with brain plasticity and electromedicine techniques. All right, well, what about stress and trauma? Well, Dr. Scare wrote a book called The Trauma Spectrum. And there's a couple of quotes I just wanted to share with you. There's the cumulative experience of life's little traumas shape our personality, our choice of mates, profession, clothes, appetite, pet peeves, social behaviors, posture, and state of physical and mental health. And what's interesting is that when we mammals are repeatedly threatened in a state of helplessness, we learn helplessness. Now, Catalano and Hartig have another study here that I think is important. Persistent elevation of maternal serum cortisol, and cortisol is the hormone that shows up in the bloodstream when we're really stressed, has very significant negative effects on the outcome of pregnancy and the health of newborns. So this is something I'm going to get into a little bit later, but just know that we've created a culture that just about guarantees moms are going to be stressed when they're pregnant, and this has consequences. All right, what are the external causes of autism stress? Well, when you think about each of the ways that we take in information, there's like a scale, and some things on that scale are so breathtakingly beautiful that you just have to stop and listen or smell. You know, your mom bakes cookies or whatever it is. It's just so good and so rich that you have to stop and celebrate and just kind of go, oh. And then there are some things that are so stressful, so ugly, so painful. You know, maybe your city has had some new policy and there are a lot more street people, or things that you feel like you can't do anything about and that are so upsetting that you just have to kind of put your focus somewhere else. You have to look away or you have to stop listening, because otherwise it's too hard to keep doing the things that you need to do to just move ahead. Now, I would argue that for most of us, the number of things in a day that are on the stressful and ugly end of the scale in our modern society are way, way, way more numerous than the things that are so beautiful that they make us stop and gasp. So just, think about what that means if you have heightened sensory sensitivities, because that's what the situation is for those of us in the spectrum. Whether it's nutritional, whether it's trouble with the transport channels in our cells, cell walls not getting the right nutrients in, whether it's a high toxic burden problem, we know that we're taking in more information than most people. Well, you know, the stuff on smelling isn't as conclusive as everything else. It may just be that we notice things more, but anyway, we tend to take in more information and have to process more information. All right, well, now there are also internal causes of stress when you have autism. You tend to have much higher physical pain from all of those health challenges that you're dealing with. It can be pain in your muscles, pain in your joints, pain in your lymphatic fluid. What's lymph pain? If you've ever had your hands swell on a hot day and they feel kind of sludgy and achy, or maybe your feet swell on an airline flight, that would be lymphatic pain. Nerve pain is tingling and numbness, or you know when you hit your elbow, you hit your funny bone, gut pain, head pain, most people have experienced. There's emotional pain. There's mental stress. Emotional pain. Um, most autistics grow up feeling like they're never going to be good enough. They're never going to be able to meet the expectations of the people around them because people expect things of them that they cannot do. Now, there can be a lot of rejection and torment. As this is not just in grade school, there are many, many adults in the spectrum who are in toxic work environments where they are bullied and do very, very difficult stuff. Now, when you're autistic, you also tend to have very strong emotions, and they can be like a tidal wave. They just sweep over you, and this is something that people around us can find a little bit daunting. We find ways to accommodate it ourselves. And then mentally stressful. If your learning capacity comes and goes from day to day, and there are explanations for that, and I do go into those, but not here. I can't cover it all. If you struggle with short-term memory, and many of us do, it tends, reasons behind that as well. If you're having sensory distortion, if you're confused by your senses and you're not sure you can trust what's coming in, it's very, very stressful. And then finally, there are a lot of people who expect you to be consistent in your abilities. Well, if you're dealing with different levels of toxins in your system every day, some days are more intoxicated than others, and you're not going to be able to perform the same every day. All right, so stress and trauma. Am I serious? Yes, I am serious. We know that exposure to violence alters early brain development, especially to the immune system and the stress response system. We know that mothers who have experienced significant trauma in childhood have had altered stress responses. And those who were abused the worst were more than 3.5 times as likely to have a child with autism. Now, in animal studies, we know that the mums who are stressed out during their early pregnancy, that predisposes their pups to having autism. Excuse me. And then we also know that, and this was a very interesting study trying to figure out how to test for whether trauma made a difference or not, but the prevalence of autism increased with the severity of prenatal exposure to major storms. So if the mom lived through a hurricane or a tropical storm, how severe that storm was is reflected in how many of their children had autism, or how many children. Sorry, I'm not explaining that very well. If they were pregnant during the storm, their likelihood of having an autistic child went up with the severity of the storm. There, I got it out. Okay. Modern parenting and brain development. Now, there's some challenges here. Dr. Spock, leave the child in the bed when the baby's crying and it'll fall asleep. What we've discovered is that when you respond to a baby's crying with calming and soothing, that influences the development of conscience in children. Positive touch affects how reactive children are to stress. Free play in nature influences our social capacities and decreases aggression. Now, what's also interesting is that when you have multiple supportive caregivers, you get better IQ and ego resilience, as well as better empathy. And then on the flip side, we still circumcise an awful lot of guys, and babies who are circumcised have an 80% or higher likelihood of autism. This is something we need to pay attention to. Now, why doesn't everyone know these things? Well, part of it is that the drug companies have big control, and what do we do about that? Another part of it is that spectrum adults who have figured a lot of this stuff out, most of them don't want to ever put themselves in a situation where they're hearing you're not good enough. And even though they're doing lots of little things to optimize their autism, it's not their driving passion the way it is for a very few of us in the spectrum. Now, those of us who research and talk about optimizing optimism or optimizing autism, we have to get past criticism from our peers who want to be respected and accepted as they are. We do too. It's just we also want to be healthy. We have to get past our own communication challenges, and that is not a trivial thing. We have to get past a medical system that overwhelmingly ignores our health problems and our voices regarding the challenge that we ourselves are dealing with. I mean, what other health disorder do you not consult with the people who are actually living with it? It's ridiculous. And then finally, I mean, we're dealing with a negative social climate, which rather than valuing our very real gifts, is highlighting our challenges. This is something that should not be happening. Now, we have been able to turn things around in our own lives. And for some of us, and for increasing numbers of us, our parents are figuring it out, and they're doing it for themselves. You can do it too. Now, some folks earn lots and lots of money, and they can pay for any and every treatment until something works. And, you know, that's one way to go about solving problems, throwing lots of money at it, but it's not necessarily the best way. Now, some folks get fancy degrees, and they learn to understand medical journal articles, and they spend their nights researching, trying to figure out how to help. And they do a lot more focused trial and error and often get better results and support with less expenditure because they're paying attention, they're learning. Now, some parents, educators, and other support professionals just care so deeply they find a way to make health possible for less able autistics who they support. And some of us in all of these categories, autistics, parents, educators, professionals, some of us deliberately compile information to support others. Now, most of that information is not complete because it leaves out the knowledge and the voices of autistics themselves. What I've done is put that together and made it easy for you. So I really want you to not give up. Other people have done it. Other people are doing it. They are optimizing autism now. They're recovering health and function. They're recovering capacity. They're recovering the problem-solving abilities that have been buried by health. So my top goal here is to break the stranglehold, to really get through globally in terms of what's going on for those of us in the spectrum and really turning things around. Now, researchers are finally starting to listen to spectrum adults because the leads that we're giving them are yielding results. You know, there's a researcher in Montreal and another one at Harvard who are doing fabulous work because they're including spectrum adults in their research. Now, our collective autistic experiences give you your lowest cost, minimal intervention results. What this means is you can get there at least expense and faster if you pay attention to what we're telling you. So I really hope I'm getting through here. All right, so let's just come back to cost. If you were going to have a coffee and a muffin every day, every weekday, that would cost you somewhere between $14 and $28 a week, depending on which coffee shops you went to. Now, if you're looking at ABA support, which is one of those rote techniques I was talking about, you're looking at paying between $100 to $1,000 per week. That's pretty serious. I mean, we're talking $4,000 a month. Now, occupational therapy, you're looking at usually between $100 and $135 an hour. And often you're wanting to see an occupational therapist once a week. And then naturopathic consultations, you know, that's more like once a month, but that would be $120 and up per consult, and that's just for the consultation. That's not for all of the supplements they're going to recommend you take. Now, I don't want to discourage you from naturopaths or occupational therapists or even from your weekday coffee and muffin, but what I want you to do is I want you to make the most of your investments in autism. So I want you to start with what autistics already know. And what I've done is I put it together in 2 programs. And you've got a choice. You can do one program. If you go it by yourself, you pay more. If you sign up with a friend, Susan and I really want you to have someone who understands what you're learning to talk things through with, because that's when you get the absolute best results. Now, if you do both programs, you get even more of a discount, especially if you do it with a buddy, a friend, a relative, or a colleague, because we want you to succeed. So think about what you're paying for that's adding to your stress instead of subtracting. Are you doing endless therapeutic work so that, as soon as your child's out of school, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing the other? Are you getting extra school supervision? Are you doing intensive trainings on holidays? What's going on in terms of harmful foods and drugs? How much extra driving and research time are you putting in? And are you happy? Because your level of stress is the biggest determinant of the happiness and well-being of the autistics around you. We're emotional barometers. We pick it up. So what I want you to do is get into the driver's seat. I want to teach you how to drive this vehicle. Now, if thriving with autism was like a game of snakes and ladders, would you avoid the snakes and climb the ladders if you knew how? That's what I want to do. I want to show you the fastest paths to optimizing autism. I want to give you support in understanding how to decipher the symptoms that you see. And I want you to understand and avoid the pitfalls, because there are pitfalls. It's a different way of being. All right. So thank you so much. I'm just a minute over time here, but I really appreciate your being here. Thank you so much for caring about someone with autism enough that you took an hour out of your day to listen to someone you don't even know fill you with facts and research and data. Now, if you've got questions or you want to talk through your options or your opportunities, send me an email and we'll set up a time to talk, and I will hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you, Jackie. That really was, you have some new slides there, some new research that you've put together, and a lot of it blew me out of the water. Excellent. Very, very good. I hope that you all enjoyed listening to Jackie, and I'll just say that Jackie is someone who has knowledge that is beyond what you will get anywhere else. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and good night.
Good night, and thank you, Susan. Really appreciate your support in doing this.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.